people saying don't work and people saying detectors are perfect and not accepting any article that has any AI in it. And both of those are wrong. 1,500 websites were de-indexed, which represented 2% of all the sites that we had looked at.
Ever since ChatGPT got released in November of 2022, that definitely changed the game.
Some of the review sites, like a G2, Trust Radius, software review sites, have had up to 30% of their reviews.
Wow. What are some of the scenarios that content creators should be paying attention to?
There's the full human and there's the full AI.
Is that a score that once you have, it's going to trigger and going to swing that way no matter what?
You know you used AI, accept it, you know you're going to get a high AI score.
Now, you guys did a huge study on this at Originality.ai.
Some had some really impressive traffic, like a handful were over 1 million a month in organic visitors, down to zero.
Why does Google need to send manual actions out?
I think what that tells me is that they're...
Before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
In this video, I will show you how we landed a placement on BBC and dozens of links in massive regional online publications such as Wales Online, Daily Post, and many more. This PR campaign was about the easiest place to pass your driving test for the first time in the UK. This is how we've done it. We simply went to DVLA website, found the latest car driving test data by test center, and downloaded the data in a CSV format. Once we had the data, all we had to do is to look at the number of total tests per test center, then look at the number of first time passes to calculate the percentage of people who passed their test for the first time. Once we had the percentage numbers, we created a press release with our findings. Then we went to Roxhill and found journalists who talk about driving tests, and also looked for journalists who write in regional publications in the UK. In total, we have found about 1,800 journalists and sent them our press release by email. Within less than a day, our story got picked up by BBC, Cornwall Live, Wales Online, and dozens of other publications in the UK, providing our client a tsunami of backlinks perfectly relevant to the audience of the client, who is a specialist in learner driver car insurance. I hope this video is helpful and it shows you how you can also build links with freely available data from official sources.
If you want similar link building PR campaigns for your website, head to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them now.
All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman. Today we are joined by Jon Gillham. Jon, welcome on board.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Great to be here. Been on a few times, but first time with you as the host. So yeah, great to be here.
Welcome back. It's always good to have a returning guest. And today we're talking about a lot of stuff happening today and in the past and going forward in the world of AI as it relates to building websites, creating content, and whatnot. I can't wait to dive in because this is ever changing. So you guys have a lot of different perspectives from where you're coming from. For those who, maybe don't know much about you or haven't heard previous episodes, give us a little bit of a backstory on who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, sounds good. So my background, engineering school, and then worked at a refinery. Wanted to leave the day job, move my family back to my hometown, and then started sort of discovering niche websites and building content sites and other sort of online businesses at the time. Built that sort of portfolio of little businesses up, left the day job 7-8 years ago now. And then off the back of sort of that skill set, built a content marketing agency, sold that. And then most recently, we built an AI detection tool called Originality.ai, which helps publishers ensure they're publishing content that meets the specifications that they're after. So sort of always been in this sort of content game and various businesses off the back of that.
Yeah, boy, you have quite a long story. When were you building your first websites? I'm just curious how far back what era we go back to in website creation.
Yeah, 2008 probably.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, way back, e-Zine articles days.
Yeah,
way back.
Yep. Little article spinner action. Were you? Do you have any sites during the Panda or Penguin updates?
For sure. Got a ton got nuked then, and then I think I've been pretty clean since. I mean, certainly ups and downs, but no sort of mass mass pain, like Panda Penguin days.
Well, you'll be well qualified as we venture into some of the things happening in today's current environment with Google, the HCU, and in past. I mean, I always tell people content creators have been through, massive shifts before. It's just been a while since we've had one or some like those back in the day. So you'll be well qualified to talk about it. Well, you are with Originality.ai, so you have a lot of experience in AI as it relates to content creation. Certainly, there's so many ways we can go with it today. There's just ever since I'd say ChatGPT got released in November of 2022, that definitely changed the game a bit. Granted, we were working with AI before that, and we were working with companies and tools like maybe a Jasper, but certainly a lot of the game changed in 2022. And then obviously we've had the evolution of that. Plus we've had now what's happening in the current Google environment as it relates to AI. Maybe AI today, AI in the past, AI tomorrow. Like, let me just throw a very broad question at you so you can kind of set the stage with where we're going to end up talking about it and maybe frame it out for us a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say, I think when AI first came out, it was a pretty, there's a great clip, I think, from Image of like a graph saying like current capabilities, and it's like, oh cute, the robot can do monkey tricks, and then it's like, oh crap, this thing is now way more capable at whatever the task is than we were. And I think GPT-2 days, 2000 to 2000, like 2020 to 2022, it was like GPT-2, not really awesome. GPT-3 came out like 2021, 2022, Jasper really burst onto the scene. We were extremely heavy users of that tool, creating AI-generated content for clients within our agency, communicating that we were using it, fact-checking it, publishing it. And then ChatGPT came along, and the world changed. In the context of Google, there's always been a question on like, does Google want this? Does Google not want this? And Google needs to try and thread this needle of being an AI forward company while ensuring their search results are not massively overrun by AI content, because why would anyone go and use Google if they could just go to the AI and get the answer? And so Google's got a really tricky line to walk. And so that's why their communication sometimes feels pretty, no, we don't want AI. No, we do want AI. It's just spam. We don't care how it's created. And then I think the update and the manual actions and some of their strategy around it in terms of trying to what feels like instill, not like there's a bit of a psyops component to this update, different than some of their past updates. And I think that's where we're at now, where it's they're trying to really communicate that they don't want AI spam, leaving it ambiguous about AI in general.
As it relates to AI in today's environment, what are some of the scenarios that are at play that content creators should be paying attention to? I'm sure everyone's going to think of one or two, but at the same time, like, let's kind of frame out some of the different scenarios on the table right now so we can start to wander into where we go from here and try to, like you said, like it's really confusing to try to listen to Google because they kind of flip-flop a bit, right? And then they have ulterior motives and they have multiple things at play. But currently right now, what kind of scenarios are we looking at? And then we can kind of move forward from that.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of what you're getting at, but it's like, if you're like plugging something into your WordPress site that is mass publishing 1,000 posts a day based off of prompts and not being human reviewed, you're going to get smoked. That is, Google does not want that. It might work for a period of time the same way as other black hats strategies can work for a period of time. On the other end of the spectrum, and I'll use like an example that we use internally, is we have some of our research team are English as a second language individuals. They do, ridiculously intelligent research and then use ChatGPT to assist them in communicating that information in English. I think that's a clean use of AI in the eyes of Google. And so I'd say there's that spectrum, the same as exists, going back in the history of sort of SEO around backlinks. There's a range. There's absolute crap that is spam and will get you punished. And then there's probably some effort that you can put into getting links. That is a really useful, effective strategy to get your site more visibility. And I think that's it. That spectrum exists within AI generated content. What I think site owners need to be careful of is making sure that they're the ones that are choosing where on that spectrum they want to be landing.
We have obviously the way the algorithm has been treating AI up until this point. And, we've seen plenty of scenarios where algorithmically a site will explode from a lot of AI content and then oftentimes tend to fall off a cliff if there aren't additional inputs or things being associated with it, right? So you'll see it grow, and then you'll see at some point the algorithm catches up to it. And obviously that's not the case with all AI sites. There's some sort of component that makes it do that. There's lots of other examples of sites that have a lower velocity of content being published with AI, or an edited component of content being published with AI, or more than just AI, right? Like internal linking and graphics and imagery and other things added. There's been lots of success stories around those scenarios. Have you seen any sort of recipe that uses AI in a way that the Google algorithm doesn't seem to mind a bit and still has more potential for long-term success?
I think when words are not the core value add of the page, I think that is a great time for AI generated content to be used systematically. And so if it's like you're creating a bunch of free tools, free calculators, and then you're putting words underneath those free calculators, or your unique images, and the focus of the story is around images, and that's the value that is being provided to the user on the page, and the words are just sort of supplemental. I think those are great long-term strategies for a sort of a systematic approach to the use of AI to create words that are published on a page. I think when the main value add of the page is words, pretty hard to sort of systematically inject AI generated words into a page and that be a net gain for Google and the end user.
So we have then March rolls along and we have a core update, a spam update, and we have, out of the blue, I would qualify it as tons of manual actions and de-indexing of sites through Google Search Console with the label of AI spam. Now, you guys did a huge study on this at Originality.ai, quickly, I might add. Well done. We featured it on the news podcast. Spencer and I talked about it, but I mean, I asked you that my last question was algorithmically. This is manual, right? So for those of you listening who aren't aware, like the algorithm can penalize a site or just remove a site for the most part from search, but then a manual action is something done manually by someone on the Google anti-spam team. So, I mean, talk about the correlations you found in the study and any other insights from what you guys kind of uncovered there.
Yeah, so we think of the internet as this like infinitely large place, that's just incredibly big. Like, there's no one that's going to find us. One thing that we've seen as we've been doing these studies is it's not that massive in terms of the number of sites that are getting meaningful traffic. There's 70,000 websites that are connected to Raptive, Mediavine, or Ezoic. Another million that are sort of on the platform for AdSense. Those are big numbers, but those aren't crazy numbers for Google to sort of like sift through and deal with. So that sort of like is a preamble into the study. So we looked at 1,500 websites were de-indexed, which represented 2% of all the sites that we had looked at. They were on Mediavine, Ezoic, or Raptive. And some of the interesting takeaways that we saw. None of the sites that had a really high DR rating. So it seemed to be very weighted to the lower DR score sites that got de-indexed. Some had some really impressive traffic, like a handful were over 1 million a month in organic visitors, down to zero. A lot of them were pretty obvious, like just manually looking at them. I didn't see many that I'm like, oh, they got this one wrong. This is like, oh yeah, you got caught. Not a lot, like they were optimizing for publishing a lot of content and not optimizing for any other means around it. Some had some attempts at programmatic SEO where there was tables that were being injected and then words around that, which I thought I don't want to say surprised at, but I thought was a reasonable strategy to try and sort of combine programmatic SEO plus AI generated content to produce what might be a more valuable page than AI would produce on its own. And they were still getting hit. So I'd say low DR, aggressive publishing of AI generated content. All the sites that we looked at had published some content that was AI generated. I don't think this was your AI content, you're banned, but and this goes back to what I talked about earlier, where it wouldn't be, I'm a pretty dumb guy. If Google hired me, there's a lot smarter people than me at Google. If Google hired me and said, hey, how can you identify what sites should get a manual action? Look at sites that are getting traffic from Google, look at which they have that information, look at the number of pages that have been indexed on those sites, look at sites that are outliers in terms of an increased number of site pages, a reasonable amount of traffic, and then run it through an AI detector. And this result of 1,500 sites would probably be pretty similar to the result that I would have produced using that same method. And so I think when the information is in Google's hands and the world of number of sites that get meaningful traffic is not infinitely large, it becomes a pretty manageable problem for Google to attack manually.
The big question I hear a lot of people asking is this reference to mass publishing, right? And like, it's easy to see on one side of the spectrum, like, oh yeah, somebody who's published 700,000 articles, that's mass publishing. And then it's easy to see on the other side of the spectrum, someone who's not using AI. And so they're limited by the finite capabilities of how many articles they or a small team of writers is able to crank out in a day. And that's usually somewhat related to how successful and big the site is, meaning you don't have 5 writers for a site that isn't earning $1 and doesn't have much traffic typically, right? So we see both sides of the spectrum, but how does someone who's using AI to help them out, how does someone who maybe is in a niche that has the potential to crank out a good amount of content, I'm using air quotes for those of you listening on the podcast, like how do these people find what massive amounts of publishing is in Google's eyes versus what is reasonable given the tools they have at their disposal?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is that this is there's going to be some correlation between DR and so I don't know enough yet to be able to say this with certainty, but I think your ability to mass publish is increased based on your DR. So the more authority your domain has, the more leeway you get with when does potentially an internal trigger. Again, this is totally theory at this stage where we don't have enough data to know how it's going to work. But I think there's some correlation between DR. So if you're a new site and you spin it up and you publish 100,000 articles, clear. So then how do you decide? And I think it comes back to depends what you're trying to do. If you are optimizing, trying to stay on the spectrum of I'm adding value, I know I've fact checked these, I know these are useful articles, I would be happy to send them, passes the family check, I'd be happy to send them to my brother or mother to help them with that, with whatever question that they have. Then I think whatever your capacity is to produce content like that, you're probably safe. If you're trying to manipulate Google, which I know it's a hard thing to do because we are all writing for the search. Like if we weren't getting traffic from Google, why a lot of us wouldn't be doing it. So it's a funny wording from Google to say don't do it for the SERPs. It's like, well, I think most of us are.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're not doing it for people, if you're not doing it for people, and then you're trying to manipulate the search results, Google doesn't like that, and they're probably going to be more aggressive on that type of content. And so I think if you're producing content that you'd be happy to send to your family to help them with that question, whatever the question is, then whatever capacity you can publish at, you're probably safe. And if you're on the other camp of trying to identify the right frequency to publish content so that you don't trigger any alarms, I think that's harder to know right now and likely DR related.
There's also stories of people getting manual actions who had a very limited amount of AI content on their site. And I'll say that there's enough of them going around that it seems like there are other factors, maybe in a minority of sites, that came to play. Any thoughts on what the other factors could have been for sites that got manual actions that maybe were using? I've heard of a hybrid of AI and written content, or a very low amount of AI content, under 1,000 in some cases. Any theories around that your study might have found, or just in general for you?
Yeah, so we're trying to. So we looked at the publicly identified sites that had been identified at the time that we did that to share the findings, and 100% of those sites had some AI generated content. The quantity of sites that we were able to look at with that study was only 14, and so we're now doing a much more in-depth study looking at 200 sites and at least 200 sites and several hundred articles off of those sites to try and identify some more, get some more detail. I think I don't know enough right now about what the other factors are, other than to say that I'm sure there would be collateral damage. Would they get it? Has Google ever gotten an update perfect? And I think that answer is no. There's always going to be collateral damage. And if they had done, I don't know how Google would sample the sites, and I don't know what Google would look at. But let's say they were using some amount of AI detection. Are they going to expend resources across all the sites or across all the content on the site? Or are they going to look at a sampling of the more trafficked articles and say, yep, these are light. We suspect these to be AI. It hits a bunch of other triggers. Significant amount of ad placement was another one that we saw, that a lot of these sites, again, potentially problem with our sample size because we were looking at sites based off of the ad platforms that they were on.
Right.
But we saw a lot of sites that had a very aggressive use of AI. It was obvious that site cared about that site for how much money it could put in their pocket, not the user.
Right. Yep. And that's been correlated with other studies. I know Cyrus Shepard did a study of Google's algorithmic updates in 2023 and found a high correlation of negativity to the review, to the update as it related to ad density and stuff. But certainly with the manual action, that's a far different thing. And that kind of brings me to my last question on this specific topic. But Spencer posed it a bit ago. And so I'm curious to get your take on it, especially as it relates to someone who's running an AI detection software. Like, why does Google need to send manual actions out when they're releasing a spam update that's supposed to remove 40% of all spam from the internet? You would think that these mass-purposed or mass-created article websites with tons and tons of articles would fall easily into that spam filter that they're releasing right now. So why the manual actions?
Yeah, I don't know. I hope we'll find out eventually. I buy into that this is a bit of a psyops, in terms of, like, they're trying to send a message.
Okay.
I think I believe
It adds
that. I
up,
think
right?
it adds up. They've done this before. Spencer's been on the receiving end of sort of like when they attack PBNs of people that publicly use them, and um, I think there's a component of this where they attempted to potentially attack sites of people that publicly talk about how they use AI to build their sites, where those sites just happen to be connected to the rest potentially. But I think it's the fact that it's a manual action, the fact that they communicated, 2 blog posts about how big these updates are going to be, and then at the exact same time rolled out the manual action on the day of the launch. This feels like whether it was marketing or they tried to send a message with this update, and I think what that tells me is that their update is not going to be as effective at attacking AI generated content as they wish it was, and so they did this other strategy to try and drive the message home in a very dramatic and sensational way. And I think it sends a clear message on what they want to do, but I also think it sends a clear message on what their capabilities are going to be related to the update. That's my current theory.
Yeah.
But I think only Google knows.
It'd be hard to argue against it. That's for sure. It's hard to find other reasons for it. Let's wade ourselves into a couple other AI, buzz-worthy events or stories a bit, because I do want to get into AI detection. But I mean, I would be remiss if we didn't touch on a few of these stories and tackle whichever one you think is appropriate or most appropriate to the conversation. But I mean, in the last couple of months, we've obviously not just had the manual actions related to AI and quote unquote AI spam, but we've also had other things that have come up along the way in our industry. We've had the Sports Illustrated author example where, authors never even existed for the AI content that was being created. We had obviously many would say that this is probably what led to some of this, which is that whole AI heist or the concept of stealing other people's content, sitemap, URL by URL. And even I suppose the topic of parasite SEO could play into the role of AI as it's relating to kind of to some degree what you talked about, like high DR sites just keep winning because there just is a higher priority and preference given to them from a trust standpoint with the mass production of AI. And that kind of leans into that. But lots of topics there. Like, do you think any of those have more relation to the larger concepts of ranking with AI these days than others?
Yeah, I think the AI theft one was a fun one that got blown out where it's like, yeah, that's kind of what everyone has already been doing forever, whether it was a human writer or an AI writer, what's the competition doing? And I mean, got sensationalized for sure. I think as a society, we're going to be wrestling with how do we use AI content ethically? And for better or worse, Google organizes the world's knowledge in the form of search results, and they're going to be a leading factor in terms of how they evaluate this type of content is going to have a significant impact on how society as a whole evaluates it. I think that the Sports Illustrated one is quite interesting, and I think will play out where I think we're going to see an increased weight placed on authors. I think he has continued to move us in that direction, or has moved us heavily in that direction. But I think high DR still, like high authority sites, still kind of didn't matter. I think Google is now communicating that they're going to, in a very nice way, not just attack parasite SEO sites off the bat that are off the back of high authority sites, which we'll all cheer as their little like indie publishers. When Forbes no longer ranks for everything, we'll be happy about that. And I think that the authorship is going to mean more and more in a world where we don't know who created it. If you are the author behind, if you're putting your name behind as the author on that, that's going to mean more in a world and sort of as we move through this post AI world. So yeah, I'd say that's I think what's probably the most relevant to, I think, the updates that are currently happening and will continue to happen, and the update that's going to be rolled out in 2 months attacking parasite SEO. Yeah, I'm excited for that. I think that's going to help level the playing field. And I think right now they have to rely on authority of a domain. I think that's going to continue to, I hope, get diminished as they evaluate more on the author, and authorship will mean more.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of the Niche Pursuits podcast. Last year, the traffic to nichepursuits.com more than tripled, with most of those gains coming from Google. In fact, I finally hit the 1 million page views per month milestone. In order to achieve this growth, my team and I publish over 100 articles a month. The final step for each of those articles? We build at least one new internal link to that article using Link Whisper. This helps index it faster and helps it rank better in Google. This also helps us avoid having any orphaned posts in the future. If you want to give your new articles the best chance possible, you need to build a process around internal linking when you publish. It only takes a few seconds with Link Whisper to get suggestions and check the box next to the internal links you want. They are all built automatically once you've made your selections. No need to go into each article, find a relevant sentence, highlight the anchor text, and add the internal link. Link Whisper does all this automatically once you've made your selection. If you want to try out Link Whisper, just head over to linkwhisper.com and use coupon code podcast at checkout in order to get $15 off.
Last question before we get into AI detection. This is all of this is ever changing, I should say. All of this is so dynamic, but what about the role of government, legislature? I mean, we're coming on the backs of the EU weighing heavily in on this recently. Obviously, different countries have had different stances on it previously. At some point, the U.S. is probably going to weigh in on it. Like to your point, we've seen Canada and Italy weigh in on it. More and more that's coming into the forefront, and Google's caught up in a lot of the antitrust lawsuit and trying to make sure they're making things happy. Like, and again, I don't want to get into too big of a theoretical conversation here, but does as site owners and as publishers, do we need to pay a lot of attention to all that noise, or do you think it's best to just ignore it and we'll see it play out in the SERPs, and that's where we pay attention to it?
That'd be my thoughts. I mean, I think, I guess on my end within AI detection, probably need to be more focused, but from a portfolio standpoint, I mean, the judge, jury, and executioner is Google for organic traffic. So, what Google does is what I care about, not what legislation does, not what Google says, but what actually happens is more what I care about. The rest is all information. I also think the legislation is going to be more focused on on the type of AI content that can cause societal harm. And I think that is heavier focused on the images and the videos that will come from AI models than I think text. Text alone, I think has less of a chance of producing societal harm than voice that turns into like scam calls, political. I think anything, especially as politicians that make the laws, videos of them doing things that they didn't actually do could be extremely harmful to them. So I think we're going to see laws get passed on the other forms of content than text first, before we see it on text.
Yeah, kind of the whole screaming baby syndrome, right? You gotta take care of the screaming baby before you can take everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about AI detection, and let's talk about it from your standpoint. And again, I'm really wanting to make sure that there's so many ways to come about it, but I want to come at it from the voice of the publisher and how AI detection can help. We talked about flags already that are trending for manual actions. I also mentioned just in general, algorithmically, AI sites that tend to rank and then go bust. But on an individual article level, how important is AI detection software to be using? Knowing that you're a bit biased, make a bit of a case for it.
Yeah, so like I'm biased on some of my sites. Like I use it, and I don't use AI detection because I know I'm using AI content. I think there's a use case for it in those sites that I'm using it on. I think a lot of people are happy to pay a writer $100. No one's happy to pay a writer $100 for an article that they just copied and pasted out of ChatGPT. Whatever side of the fence you sit on in terms of like, hey, AI content's good to go, Google doesn't care, just hammer the SERPs with it. I think that's an over aggressive, or no, I never want AI to touch my site. We want publishers to be the ones that make that decision, not the writers. And so that's where we see AI detection sitting inside the content production ecosystem, for publishers, is that we want publishers to be the ones that decide what content goes on their site and what risks that they're accepting. Everyone wants non-plagiarized, fact-checked content, whether it's AI generated or not. That's their decision, but we want them to make that decision, not the writer, to be the one that's making the decision. So that's how we view AI detection in the world of site publishers.
I want to tackle it from two different sides. I'm going to say it out loud so I don't forget, because I didn't have time to write it down in my notes. The first side is just that publishers trying to make sure that they're getting handwritten content that they're paying for. Not that there's anything wrong necessarily with getting AI content, as long as you know you're paying for AI content, right? So that's scenario one. Scenario two would be the publisher, and I hear this a lot, the publisher who wants to make their AI then human edited content look less like AI to a detection software. So maybe we'll circle back on that one, and I want to hear your thoughts. But going back to that first one, the publisher who's hiring writers and wanting to make sure they're getting the scenario that comes up for people that I hear is false positives. My writer says they wrote it, it's showing up as AI. What are some ways to navigate that as it relates to software and conversations, either from a tactile standpoint or just from a personal standpoint? You got a writer you've been working with for a while, and to some degree have an element of trust with them on.
Yeah, so false positives happen. I'd say the framework that we are attempting to, that most people are attempting to use AI detection in is in the framework of plagiarism. That's what we've used for the last 20 years is plagiarism detection. Does it pass plagiarism or not? Yes or no? Go, no go decision, simple. AI detection is tougher because all AI detectors are a probability machine, and that says here's the probability that it was AI generated versus the probability that it was human generated. And so, although it can be very, very accurate, on non-adversarial prompts, it's 99% accurate, 1 to 2% false positive rate. That still means when we're running thousands of scans a day, we are calling human generated content AI generated, and that causes pain. We know that, we hate it, it sucks. We're trying to reduce it. Um, Tactically, what can we do when you are working with writers, or you are a writer and you have a false positive or potential false positive? We like to work with writers on a series of articles, not just on an individual article by article case. If we give a writer that their content usually hits like 30%, 40% probability of AI, and then there's one that hit a 60% probability of AI, and then it just dropped back down to 30, 40, and you believe them, you have a trust with them, that's just a false positive. Carry on. It should be, I think that's the right play in that scenario. If you have a writer that used to have 0% probability of AI generated content and then switched in a week and now it's getting 100% probability of AI content, that's probably because they started using AI. And if you don't want them using it, yeah, they discovered ChatGPT and said, oh, I can do a lot more contracts for this amount. We have a lot more people talking to us about the number of people that they've caught than the false positives they need to navigate. So we have a free Chrome extension to help with false positives that recreates recreates the creation of a document. So if the writer wrote in a Google Doc, you get editor access to the Google document and then use our free Chrome extension, and it recreates the visualization of the creation process. That can be tricked, but a lot easier ways to sort of steal $100 than to go through that entire process. So those are some of the tactical things. We have live support within Originality to try and help people navigate false positives, and that's greatly reduced the number of that people used to think a false positive is like if it says it's 25% chance of AI, 75% chance of human, and they know it's human written, they would call that a false positive because it should show up as 100%. That's not the way the classifiers work. The detectors say our probability is AI versus the probability it's human. So that says it's 75% chance it's human. That correctly identified that article as human generated. And then also people will use AI and then edit it heavily and then say that like this is a human article. It's like, well, it's tough. There's that we're back to a spectrum of like there's the full human and there's the full AI, but it gets tricky in between. And that's a problem that is not yet fully solved. But transparency with the writers and us as a site publisher need to be on the same page on what is allowed and not allowed on our sites.
Yeah, it's very complicated in practicality, I find, or in application. I guess it doesn't need to be, but it can be. My business partner and I have had this discussion a couple of times. The best way we've found to liken it is it's a bit like the weather report, right? Like it can say 20% chance of rain, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to rain or that it is going to rain. It just means that 2 out of 10 times when the algorithm ran the model for today's weather, it showed up with rain. And it can be 100% chance of rain and only rain for 10 minutes that day, and it still was accurate, right? Yeah. Versus it can be a 30% chance of rain, but then rain sporadically all day. And all these scenarios are accurate and exist inside the same prediction, right?
Right. Exactly. And the fact that it didn't rain once doesn't mean you're not going to trust the weather. It doesn't mean you're not going to bring the umbrella when it says 100% the next day. That these things have some amount of accuracy, also some amount of inaccuracy as a nature of being a predictive machine.
I've also heard people say mistakenly, and I'm glad you kind of clarified the percentages there, like when it says 25%, that doesn't mean 25% of the article is AI. Mm-hmm. It means the article has a 25% chance of being AI generated, right?
Yeah, exactly. So. There's also a lot of misinformation that has come out where like we've done a ton of work to try and communicate the limitations of our tool on different data sets, every publicly available data set. We've run our tool through so that we can sort of transparently communicate the efficacy, even when those numbers are not where we wish they were. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as a result of OpenAI, communicating the detectors don't work because their detector was so tuned to reducing false positives that it became useless. And then there's other detectors that are out there that are claiming accuracy rates with no communication of their data set, and it leads to this world of people saying detectors are don't work, and people saying detectors are perfect and not accepting any article that has any AI in it. And both of those are wrong. Unfortunately for all of us, we need to navigate a more complex world now.
Yeah. Yeah, another challenge we've had a couple times is when we're using optimization software, because inevitably whenever you use optimization software, you're trying to make, from a density standpoint, certainly, but other things as well, trying to make your article more like other content, theoretically the content that's ranking better than you. Well, in essence, I haven't created any software around AI detection, but it stands to reason you're making your article look more and more like what's already on the web, and therefore potentially, and we've seen it play out, getting a higher AI detection score.
Anytime AI is used in the creation of content, it increases the chances that the detector is going to identify it as AI generated. Heavy use of Grammarly, a heavy use of SEO optimization tools, all lead to an increased likelihood that content will look like it was AI generated, which potentially is okay, potentially isn't. Again, it comes back to sort of that agreement between, and we've seen some publishers work with writers to say, like, submit your pre-optimized content, and then we know you're going to go and optimize it. And so doing the anti-AI check at that pre-optimization stage, and then they go and optimize it.
That's smart. Okay. Well, that dovetails nicely. What about that second scenario where you've got people out there who are, I don't know what spectrum they're on in terms of how much of their content is AI produced versus human produced, but they're trying to make their content look less AI. They're trying to, at a very tactical level, get the score, the percentage back from Originality.ai to be lower from AI, right? And so how do you navigate that? How do you talk about that? What do you say to that? If it's something that you support, what tips do you have for that?
Yeah, so I'd say it's something we don't support.
Okay.
I mean, we support people using our tool. That's great, but I don't think it's a useful. We're not Google. Google will have their own algorithm for identifying if content was AI generated. Creating content with AI and then trying to use other AI to bypass the only methods we have seen to achieve that reduces the quality of the content. And in the end, that does not serve the users and still leaves fingerprints and we've seen no method that is consistently effective at bypassing detection, with the exception of turning it into absolute gibberish. I think if you know you've used AI and you're comfortable with using AI, I think that same energy that you put into trying to trick a tool that isn't Google is better spent in putting that energy into finding ways to make that piece of content a net add to the internet versus tricking originality. If you know you used AI, accept it. You know you're going to get a high AA score, publish the best possible piece of content you can, and spend the energy on tricking originality into making the piece of content more useful to the readers, because that's ultimately what Google and your readers want. It's fun to try and trick originality. I mean, we have a red team that's what they do all day, is try and find ways of tricking originality. And then every time they find a way that is marginally effective, we train our data. We build a data set off the back of that and train our detector on it. So I get it. It's fun. It's fun to game systems. That's kind of what, to some extent, what a lot of SEO is about. Don't recommend it because I think it's just it's an effort that doesn't lead to, I think, any net benefit to anyone.
Right. Let's say you're someone out there who has an article that's scoring really high in Originality.ai for whatever reason. Does doing things like adding unique imagery, putting unique tables in, pulling in different data sets that you've gone and found on your own, does that actually help reduce that score? Or is that a score that once you have the base of the article created, it's going to trigger and going to swing that way no matter what?
So, one of the funny things with AI is, when people ask us, like, what why it triggered this article to be AI generated. The kind of crazy answers we don't know. Our AI sat, equivalent like of sat in a factory, a warehouse that had human articles and millions of AI articles, and it had this giant brain and learned to tell the difference between the two and recognize patterns. We don't know what all those patterns are that it recognizes. That's where AI is so powerful. And so once it's been triggered, it can be very hard to sort of identify what it was that triggered it. So all those things that you just talked about, adding unique data, uh, is awesome. I think if you know that it was human created, it got a high AI score. We have our Chrome extension to ensure that that can be communicated to the customer that this was human written. Here's how you can see that. And if that is a one-off case for that writer, that what we would hope that the person purchasing that piece of content would say, "Great, we trust you. Carry on." And then the rest of that effort being spent adding in all the things that you just talked about that makes that piece of content more useful.
Well, that's good. I'm really glad we had a conversation around the best practices for using something like an Originality.ai, because there's both a lot of confusion in how to interpret the tool, and we sorted through
Yep.
that, but also in the best way to utilize the tool, and I think a lot of people will hopefully better understand the tool, where it's best applied, where it's not best applied, where they're wasting potentially their time trying to modify and adjust things. And I think you've drawn a good line that I want to just kind of underscore again, like, it's not about AI versus not AI. It's about having a tool to help you understand what you are and aren't getting. And then, in terms of content creation, it's not making a judgment on the validity of the content for the internet. It's making a judgment on its likelihood of being AI created or not. That's all.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just about providing that. And we talk about AI detection, but we have like the plagiarism detection, fact checking, readability. It's about sort of letting publishers make sure they're able to hit publish with a piece of content that meets the standards that they're trying to achieve for their site.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of companies at the beginning that are using AI in a way that's maybe not as open with their audience, but certainly for a company that wants to be open with their audience, they still have to make sure they can actually obtain that and actually hit that every single time. So yeah,
Right.
it doesn't make the news as much. But hey, we got a few more minutes left. I know we talked a lot about your study of the manual penalties, but you and I had gone back and forth about a number of studies that you guys have done, some case studies, some cool results, some cool things. We probably have about 5 or 10 minutes. Anything that comes to mind that you think would be fun to close on and share?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is we're using their tool a ton to look at just where's AI content. I'll use the word polluting, not necessarily the right word for it, but where is it polluting the internet? And what we've seen is some really fascinating places. So some of the review sites, like a G2, Trust Radius, software review sites, have had up to 30% of their reviews since the launch of ChatGPT being AI, suspected of being AI generated. And so, when you're going online to read a review, you're looking at uh, reading a review, or you need to complete a Turing test where basically you're trying to figure out, is this review that I'm reading a human I'm interacting with, or an AI that I'm interacting with? We've also seen other review sites start to like have their AI generated number, so like gone from like a 2% review rate, which sort of falls in line with our false positives that predated GPT-3, and then it sort of climbed up to like 10%, and then ChatGPT launched, jumped to 30%. And then we've seen some sites being able to sort of effectively bring that back down. So some sites trying to work on reducing that. We've seen Reddit, sort of a SEO's one of SEO's current favorite sort of kicking boys online of sort of complaining about how much organic traffic Reddit gets compared to all our sites. And we've seen a significant increase in the number of posts that are AI generated on Reddit, even though, I think potentially the theory around why have all these user generated sites gotten such a lift in Google is in part because Google is trying to prioritize human first content, and these sites have a decent human filter of human versus just spam already cooked into it. So it's sort of an extra layer of that of that human versus machine filtering on the
Mhm.
user generated sites. So
God,
that
that's
study
fascinating.
we found was interesting.
Yeah. Wha- I mean, I guess what can the individual publisher take from that? Aside from being fascinating, by the way, which I'm fascinated by the whole thing, but what can the individual publisher take from that?
I think it says that the society as a whole hasn't worked out where it's okay and not okay to use AI generated content. I think a lot of us would agree that we don't want to read a review that was AI generated unless we know that there was a human behind it that reviewed it, that feedback and communicated it. But what we don't want is an AI that says, "Hey, write a review on this water bottle," and that's the review that we're reading, making our purchasing decision. I think that's bad. We don't like that, and I think what we're also seeing is Google, by prioritizing user generated sites, is also trying to wrestle with this yet incomplete ability to manage AI generated spam. Um, and so I think my takeaway from it is the world is still wrestling with what is how we want to live in a generative AI world, and that is not yet finalized. But just because it's working, just because what was the takeaway? Just because it's working now, doesn't mean that that's going to be working in the future
Mhm.
in the form of mass producing AI generated content.
It's very interesting. The whole concept of user generated, if you literally look at the words, is that it's not AI. And if AI is flooding to the UGC platforms, then it almost flies in the face of what people originally wanted. So, going to
Yep.
have a little bit of a crux on their hands here pretty soon at this point, especially with some of the data you just shared.
Yep.
John, that was fun. That hour flew by. Where can people catch up with you? You're very active, I know, in this industry and have been for quite some time. But where can people catch up, follow along, touch base with you if anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on X, use it a bit. I'm on LinkedIn again, use it a bit. But my main focus right now is on Originality, and yeah, you can reach out to Jon Jon at Originality.ai, and happy to happy to if anyone has any questions related to this, best practices around working AI detection into their content creation workflow. Yeah, happy to chat.
John, thank you so much. Been great to have you on. Welcome back. Thank you again. My first
Thank you.
time interviewing you, though. So it definitely has been a couple years. Thanks again. And we'll catch up with you again soon.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Just a final reminder that it was brought to you by Search Intelligence. And if you're looking for link building PR campaigns for your website, just head over to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them today. Cheers.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. I just wanted to remind you that if you are ready to start building smarter, faster, and easier internal links, you should check out Link Whisper. You can get $15 off Link Whisper when you use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use the code PODCAST in order to save $15. Thanks again for listening.